Good afternoon, and welcome to the Hour with the Art Gallery at Eastern Connecticut State University. Today on the show, we are honored to welcome Patricia Miranda, an artist, curator, educator, and founder of several influential art initiatives, including the Lace Archive, the Crete Lab, and the MAPSpace. Patricia's work is deeply rooted in history, memory, and materiality, often incorporating repurposed lace and textiles to explore themes of labor, care, and feminine legacy. Patricia's most recent exhibition at Five Points Art Center in Torrington, Connecticut was titled I Am My Mother's Savage Daughter, was on view from February 28 through April 12, 2025, this year. With a background in both studio practice and arts education, Patricia has developed programs for institutions like the Guggenheim, the Smithsonian, and the American Museum of Natural History. We are thrilled to have her with us today to talk about her journey, her inspirations, and her advice for the next generation of artists. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and to meet you and to hear about all the wonderful things you're doing there at the gallery.
Can you tell us about your path into the arts? What drew you to this field initially?
I think just personally, I think I don't remember a time where I didn't want to be an artist or didn't think of myself as an artist. So um I'm come from a very large family. I'm in the middle of seven children, uh, big Italian American and an Irish family. So there was always a lot of activity and making and creating. So yeah, I think it's rooted in my DNA, I think. And also as a middle child, I think you're always looking at all sides of things and thinking about all sides of things. And I think that has served me well as an artist, actually.
Wonderful. How did your formal education shape your artistic voice and practice?
Well, I think in many ways. I think concentrated study of any kind, the ability to develop a um, very strong sense of attention, paying attention, close attention, focus, in-depth focus is incredibly crucial. I think that's what artists do is we pay attention, and we sort of see things and notice things, pay attention to things, and then translate them in our own languages. And an educational program and opportunity is such a gift, really, honestly. And I feel like as someone who I feel like I've been an educator so long that I'm a perpetual student, but I think that I feel like I'm in situations where I'm working with whether it's students in undergrad or graduate programs or working artists, which is primarily what I work with today. I feel like it's just a constant inspiration. It's a form of listening. Um, and yeah, attention and listening. I think that would be obviously there are the formal things. You're learning some, skills-based things. You're learning the history of art, the history of the context of art and everything else. And all of that has to happen in a place of real attention and attentiveness.
Well, since you mentioned that you are advising contemporary artists and have critique studios and labs, I wanted to jump ahead and ask you about these practices and how are they structured and what's involved, how one can apply to be your student, and yeah, what's the process, and then of course how you are expanding your practices based on these critiques and interactions.
I think of my practice, my practice as kind of like a wheel. At the center of the wheel is the studio, which is the heart of everything, right? It's the place where I most kind of feel deeply connected. It's funny, not everybody has this kind of insatiable desire to interpret their experience into a material form, which for us artists is how is that possible that not everybody wants to do this? But it is true. So I think that we have this, it's a gift and a responsibility, I think, to the world to be the kind of to be a kind of voice in the world for what's happening, to see things before other people see them, to interpret them for other people, to create spaces of contemplation, spaces of resistance, spaces of, understanding and challenge. So I think that the studio is the core of my practice. And then there are these kind of almost like spokes off of it, which are the educational things that I do, working with, whether it's teaching in an institution or working with the Crit Lab, which I'll talk about in a second, or curating, like bringing artists' work together to kind of create new meaning, to amplify meaning that is already there, to create new meaning, to build relationships, and building like communities of artists. So all of these things are kind of part of my practice. I don't think of them as necessarily distinct. So the Crit Lab is, so I've taught in undergrad and graduate programs for many years. And what the Crit Lab actually started with 5 people in my studio, meeting monthly for a rigorous critique. And I love critique. I'm passionate about critique, but I'm also acutely aware of the problematics that are, that exist in critique, a kind of unspoken biases, the unspoken personal kind of interpretations, and unspoken issues around gender or race or age and everything else. So I love critique and also understood the problematics, or, to the best of my abilities, and developed a pedagogy which I think does its best to account for those. We can't obviously eliminate those things that exist in us. The world is in us, the world is in us, the world is in the work, the world is in the room with us when we're talking. And so it's a way of acknowledging that, but also thinking about ways we can focus on the work as a kind of independent actor in the world. So the pedagogy is really structured to talk about the artwork as a verb, as an independent actor, as opposed to talk about the artist and the motivations and everything else, because I think that gets us into this kind of tangle of, what you wanted or desired, or what you thought and what I thought about it and what you thought about it. Whereas if we analyze the work, what the work is doing, how the materials are communicating, what are the contexts that are swirling around the work, what are the discourses that the work is engaged in, we kind of, we are able to really see how the work is acting and functioning in the world and learn from the work. My goal is always to learn from the work, as opposed to kind of impose our will upon the work. Because I think as artists, it's a collaboration between our desire, our experience, our interaction with materials, the world, again, that is in us, that is not always visible to us, that will show up in the work, and to protect that creative process. So this analytical method that I developed is not, there are parts that will be familiar to people who've been in academic critique situations, that I think there are a few things that I've created that are somewhat unique in talking about the work, that preserve the sort of inchoate nature of the creative process, and also the autonomy of the artist. So it's never like, why are you doing this? It's always about what's happening in this work, and how might, what are those things, how are those things functioning, and how might they shift or change? So it's a really powerful method, and it's so the Crit Lab started with 5 people in my studio, and now we have between 50 to 75 people every semester in the program. And there are some slightly different programs that I do, but it's designed to really be an ongoing 5-month. The primary labs are an ongoing 5-month conversation with a small cohort, so the same people, which is a little bit different than a cold critique where someone doesn't know your work. Not a qualitative difference, but a quantitative difference. So the ongoing conversation develops a kind of trust and community, and an ongoing conversation. So you're not sort of presenting finished, here I am in all of my finish, but like presenting modes of thinking, things in progress, objects in progress, ideas in progress, things in development. And over the time, we work together to kind of talk through them. So it's pretty exciting, honestly, to me, because, what could be a greater privilege than I get to talk to artists all day long about their work. And it's also not me doing all of the critiquing. The goal is for the pedagogy is structured so that it is basically giving people ways to articulate language around their work and articulate language around other people's work. So I sort of shepherd the dialogue, and depending on where people are at in their practice, how familiar they are with some of these kinds of dialogues, will come in, more or less earlier in the conversation, et cetera. Or sometimes, the artists are talking amongst themselves, and I will come around and sort of make, connect some dots, put some things on the table that I feel like people maybe didn't see, and kind of, contextualize things a bit more. So it's very powerful. I have people who've been in the lab since it began in 2013, because it's not a class in the traditional sense. It's it's a place to come and to be in a rigorous, supportive, really a kind and supportive and ethical environment. Those things are really important to me. And to talk about your work, to kind of bring the ideas to a group of very serious, rigorous artists at all levels. It's not really about the levels. I feel like everybody can enter this conversation wherever they're at in their practice, whether you're just starting out or whether you're showing in museums. So I have people at all those levels. So it's, I feel like it's really a thrill for me. And so there's an application process, which is basically more of a curatorial process for me. So in other words, the groups are not, it's not like a traditional workshop where you sign up. Oh, I want to take this class on Monday morning. It's more, you sign up for the lab. And then I do this kind of what I imagine fantasy football would be if I knew anything about fantasy football. Like, I create these kind of dream team groups. So I think, oh, this work is going to be really to learn these artists are going to learn a lot from one another, or they're engaged in similar discourses, or there might be, wow, I think there's some challenges here that might really be a productive environment for these artists. So it's not necessarily media specific. In other words, it's not all painters or all this, although sometimes there's a more of a preponderance of a particular media. But the idea is to create a really dynamic, engaging, rigorous, and challenging, but very supportive dialogue between the artists. So yeah, that's kind of the structure. And I also have what I call the Alt MFA, which is a shorter, and there's going to be one in October of this year. So I'm excited about that. It's in development, so stay tuned, where I bring in visiting artists. And so then we do small group critiques that are more like the cold critique, right? Someone who comes in, who doesn't know you and gives you feedback and everything like that. And there'll be some artist talks and some other programming around that. And it's mostly virtual, but this time we will have a few things happening in New York in person. So it's a little bit of a combination. So that's the Crit Lab.
So the Crit Lab is online. Is this correct?
Yes, it started in, as I said, with 5 people in my studio. But when the pandemic happened, we went virtual. And at first, everyone was like, this is not possible. We can't possibly do this. The virtual is not going to work. So I really sat down and, being someone who's very interested in pedagogy, I thought about, well, what is a pedagogy for the digital space? How can we think about the digital space as its own unique environment where we can engage in a different way than, like, in other words, not think of it as an inadequate representation of the real, but its own kind of space. And the interesting thing about the digital space that's so powerful, in person is really powerful also. But they do different things. So in the digital space, like you and I are sitting here right now, we're in our rectangles. Everyone has a front row seat, right? I mean, the groups are small, so we're not talking about a Zoom with 50 people where you're seeing like lots and lots of images in the group. It's a small enough group of people, maximum of 7. So everyone is there. Everyone has a front row seat. We're all heart and head. We're not negotiating bodies. And so that I found gets pretty deep pretty quickly because you're just so present. And also, I feel like the digital space makes visible, if you're someone that talks, I'm a good talker, right? So when you're in the digital space with a small group of people, you can feel really quickly when you're using up all of the bandwidth in the room, right? And so people really are so generous with one another and step back and be like, you know what, I think, I need to make space for other people or leave space open. And then if you're someone who's more introverted, who in person might not say very much, somehow in the digital space, I've found that people feel much more comfortable. Again, it's not a huge group of people. It's a small, intimate group that you trust. So I had the experience of people who maybe didn't talk very much at all in the in-person labs began to really talk quite a bit in the virtual lab. So it serves different kind of learning, learning modalities, and also just different sides of our brain and different sides of our body engage in the digital space. And then the other thing is, just in very practical terms, 99% of people are going to encounter your work digitally. And that's not because fewer people are seeing it in real life. It's because exponentially more people will see it in person. So one of the things I talk about is the pedagogy of the digital space also includes, how do we make visible the things that are important to us about the work in the digital space? So my work, for example, it's tactile, it's very large, it's textile, it's dyes. So, that can be really difficult in the digital space, right? So it is my kind of responsibility as an artist, for better or worse, to be sure that when I am presenting the work in the digital space, that the things that are important to me, in other words, the conceptual framework of the work, is visible in the digital space. So I have to think differently about how I present work in the digital space than I might have before the pandemic. You know what I mean? Like, the digital space is now a genuine space, but different work presents differently. So that's something that we think through also, because you can take a picture that's beautiful, but really doesn't communicate something really fundamental about the work in the digital space. So, and that's true whether you're making, paintings or whether you're making large scale installations. So there's certain strategies, like practical strategies, and then conceptual strategies for thinking through what is most important to you, which in my view is the conceptual framework of the work, is the thing that people see when they're looking at the work, as opposed to like a picture of a group of objects. Right? The most important thing is the vision, the overall vision and conceptual ideas in the work manifested, through a material language. So it's not that the material is less important, it's extremely important. In my work, it's all about the materiality. So I have to figure out a way where that's visible when you're looking at a 40-foot, thing that in a digital space, it's like, it looks really nice, but I don't really know what that is. Do you know what I mean? So that's part of it too. I think it's really important. It can be so incredibly useful. And also it helps for us to frame our relationship with the digital space. I just did a talk about AI and Chat GPT for artists in New York. And, I'm not an AI artist. It's not really part of my practice. And yet I'm working with so many artists. For me, it's always about like, how do we think about our relationship to this technology? Because it's here and we need to negotiate it and think about, how we want to. So it's not using us, but that we are utilizing it in a way that is productive and meaningful for us. I think that's really important because, of course, the algorithms, are coming for us. So we can resist.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about AI, since it's all about, we teach AI a little bit, or we engage it in our classes
Yeah.
quite a bit. So I wanted to ask you, what's your takeaway, not to distract us from our main conversation, but what are your three takes away from your experience with AI that you just gave the talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, right? The technology is here. Now, one can say I'm going to be completely off grid and all of that. I think that's a different conversation. Most of us are going to engage with these technologies, and we will need to, in all sorts of aspects of our lives and as artists. And I think the thing that I talk about most is being conscious and aware of your use, because it it's designed to be addictive, not just AI, but the digital, the algorithms and all the frameworks are designed to kind of keep your attention and to do all these things. And I use my technology a lot. Obviously I'm learning a whole program online, so it's really important. And yet I want to structure my relationship. I want to think in like an ethical, conscious way about how I'm engaging with these technologies. So there's a much longer conversation around that, which is really interesting to me. To me, it's again about framing one's relationship. Like, what is this technology really? What can it do for me? How can I, not let it lead me? I mean, it's not unlike when you use a material as an artist, whether it's paint or textile. If the material is ahead of you, in other words, the artistic vision is what leads the work. And if the material is sort of more front and center in terms of leading how the work is constructed, that's usually not a great sign in the work. So to me, it's another tool. It's a very powerful tool, and it's invasive. And so, but I can choose to turn it off. I can control how I use it. I'm going to use it for very distinct things in really careful and conscious ways and in ethical ways, which again is something that is sort of intertwined in all of my teaching as a kind of ethical aesthetic, in relationship to my materials, in relationship to how I express my ideas, and in relationship to my technologies. So I think that's how I would frame it, because it's so easy for it to lead us. We're all doom scrolling and everything else. We can take that attention back, honestly.
Yeah, I truly agree with you. We need to use it, but very, very consciously and productively for us.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Exactly.
wanted to turn back our conversation a little bit and talk about your work.
Mhm.
Much of your work involves lace, textiles, and repurposed materials. What inspired you to focus on these elements?
So I've been working with historic dyes and pigments for a very long time, and in different modes. And I started working some years ago now with some family textiles, some family lace that I had. And, I always say that, there's a shift going on in your work, and you don't always know what that means, but my sort of mode is, when I don't know what's happening, I close my eyes and think about what I want to touch. And that is all I need to know is where my hands want to take me. So when I first started working with textile, I didn't really know what would happen. I was really unsure. And I was like, all right, but this is what I want to touch. This is what I want to touch. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to follow. I'm going to trust my hands. I'm going to trust the cognitive knowledge of my hands, which is usually so far ahead of my brain. So I started doing that. And then and I also think I was thinking about ecological issues, and I was making sculpture, and I was thinking about the practical modes, I was thinking about the machismo of big installations, and how do you store that, and it has to transport it. And it started to feel really like it was beginning to kind of be outside of my ethical aesthetic. I wanted to do something and yet at the same time, I wanted to be able to live into my ambition as an artist, to make large, ambitious installations, but to not do that in a way that was going to be very resource heavy and also expensive and require all kinds of things of me that I didn't feel were what I was really interested in conceptually and also practically. And so textile seemed to answer that. I could make very large installations that then fold up, very quickly and then are very transportable, and that became really important. So the scale is really important for numerous reasons. But the lace archive came about because when I was working with textile, I posted an image of dyeing some lace with cochineal insect dye, which I use a lot, on social media. And someone sent me a note saying, I have some lace. Would you like it? And I said, that'd be fabulous. Thank you so much. And she sent me this big box. And I thought, my gosh, wow, that's fabulous. But then I got another box and another box and another box. And then people started sending me photos and stories and, all kinds of things. And I realized that this was a really important historic community archive of women's history. And that's how the lace archive was born. And so a lot of the textiles I use are what I would call what come from the lace archive. Other pieces come from, repurposed things I find and collect myself, but there's a very large proportion are donated. And I feel like the objects themselves are a kind of testament or evidence of the histories of these women whose stories will never be told. And so I photograph and document every single thing that people send me, no matter how small, no matter how large, no matter if it's handmade or machine, it doesn't matter to me, because somebody cared enough to preserve it and to give it to me. And they give it to me because they don't know, they want to preserve it, but they don't really have a way, nobody wants it, or it's not being passed along. And that the idea that it'll live on, it'll have a second life in an artwork while still being documented feels very powerful. And so there's a very kind of big feminist aspect to this, because when you have a 37-foot by 11-foot wall of lace, the sort of history of the women's labor becomes undeniable. It's really visible. So the scale is not only because as an artist I have that ambition, but also because I want that to be so undeniable. You can't deny, here it is, it's lace, it's feminine, it's soft, it's resilient, it's flexible, it's all of these things that have been, these kind of attributes that have been feminized as negative and that I want to claim as really positive. It's adaptable, it's all of these things, soft and frilly and beautiful, and all that is really important. And so that's a part of the scale also, is for this work to be as kind of undeniably feminine. And I mean feminine, not in female, but feminine, to kind of claim that, binary as a way to kind of disrupt that binary. So in a time where, women's bodies and many other people's bodies are being policed at an increasing rate, I feel like this is an act of, resistance and rebellion, while also being something that doesn't become the thing I'm resisting, right? Doesn't become a big macho thing that requires all this resource, but becomes something that remains very soft and flexible. And it has, lace has incredible tensile strength. All textile does, right? It's so strong, and yet it's so flexible. It's so it can maintain that beautiful softness and still be this kind of, statement of strength, of feminine strength. So that's really important to me in the work, for sure.
While listening to you and your description of lace, I was reminded about Judy Chicago's exhibition that I saw, I think, a year ago at the New Museum, I think. And I wonder if you were, or at the Whitney, I wonder if you were part of this exhibition.
I wasn't part of the exhibition, but I mean, I appreciate that work so much, of course. And I think there's a lot of that work that is so situated in its time, in ways that that work needs to be sort of didactic and more didactic and sometimes. And so it's fabulous work and really important work. I think I'm thinking a lot also about metaphor in the work, in the sense that, not that Judy Chicago isn't, I mean, departing from that, but in the way that an object can be both very visibly one thing while having many, many layers of other content that is available and kind of accessible in the work for anyone who wants to stay to encounter it. So in other words, the first thing you see is the lace, and it's very, this kind of femininity and all of that, and the scale and this, and then there are these layers that can unfold through an extended encounter with the work. So the lace is both something that's very literal and also metaphorical at the same time. So that I'm interested in that the space between that, something that can function on those multiple levels.
Talking about your influences and inspirations, who were some of the artistic influences, or maybe writers or other artists?
It's a it's a hard question just because there are so many, and I'm such a sort of hungry, hungry. I have such a hungry brain. I'm always looking. So you might ask me today, and I'll give you one set of artists and another set tomorrow. But I think I do a lot of reading. I'm very interested in critical theory and stuff like that. And then I'm interested in artists who, so for example, Doris Salcedo is an artist who I think really embodies that what I was saying about an object that is extremely visible and metaphorical at the same time. I'm interested in artists where I'm interested in so many artists. That's the issue. But I think in the lane of which my work is sort of occupies is related to very much to artists who think who use materials as foregrounded content, not like accepting that the mere presence of the material communicates a certain kind of meaning, but that one is using that content and history of that material as a way to say something that is important to you. So Doris Salcedo is a great example of that. It's very visible what she's using, and yet she transforms it into these metaphorical objects.
You mentioned that you're leaving for Greece like tomorrow.
Yes.
Uh, can you tell us more about your purpose of going to Greece?
Yeah, so a big part of my practice is, community oriented projects and programs and so for example, just putting Greece aside for a second, I run MAPSpace, which is a project space in Portchester, New York. And it's a gallery and project space. I've run residencies there. Right now we have this incredible program, exhibition and program called The Future Belongs to the Loving, where we just did a whole lace day for international the international international lace day. We did another project around, we have a bunch of projects. So we have a really interesting ink making, an artist who makes ink from guns and zines and everything else. So if you check out the mapspace.art website, you can check out that both exhibition and all of the programming. And that was, and the reason I'm saying this now is because it's part of this practice where I'm always interested in community building, existing communities, building community, and working with communities. So the future project was a project that came about as an act of resistance, and I'm working with 4 incredible artists who we developed this project, and there are 50 artists in the exhibition, and there's programming all along the way. So all happens at MAPSpace. Days of making, meeting, sitting around tables, talking and making together, which I feel like is resilient communities, resilient grassroots communities to me are fundamental, especially right now. So the conference in Greece is part of a walking art community, an international walking art community. And I am also very lucky to be half of a partnership with another artist who is for whom a primary part of his practice is walking as an art practice. So this is a conference that happens in northern Greece every 2 years, and is a kind of really interesting international community of artists who come together, and there's presentations and there are workshops and there's all this engagement. And this is very much outside of what we think of, especially in New York, as a kind of commodity-based practice. These are artists who are walking as a form of drawing on the earth, or as a form of community building. There's a really wide-ranging kinds of practices that people are engaged with. So we are going to go, and Christopher, my partner, is going to do a workshop, and we will participate. I'm part of another workshop. So it's a really fantastic and wonderful program. And for the Crit Lab, I also developed a residency. We have a residency in Porchester at MAPSpace, but also in Italy. So in the Alps, and that will happen. The next residency will be next year as part of, we go to the Venice to the Biennale for a week, and then we go to this really small family residency in the Alps that I've been working with for many years. So we're also going after Greece. We're heading to Italy for a residency there. So, always trying to build community and to work with people in a very grassroots way that are in places that are functioning somewhat outside of that kind of, really hyper commodified market. And I'm also looking forward to taking some time away from the technology and stuff, right? With real intentionality while we're there.
Well, Patricia, I'm amazed by the multitude of the projects you are engaged in, and it's really, really inspiring just to listen how many things you have ongoing. And I can imagine how much energy it takes to sustain these projects. What habits or mindset help you to sustain this energy or to and to continue this energetic and mindful activity or practice?
Yeah, I think part of it is my personality. But I feel like I really get so much energy from working with artists. I'm sort of, the studio practice is quite solitary. When you're working in the studio, you're on your own. And I feel like the combination with kind of developing programming and working with artists and building in community are this balance that for me is really important. I think that it's different for every artist. We all have different things that make us, that excite us and that keep us motivated. And so people are always like, oh, you're doing so many things. And that doesn't mean that everyone's practice needs to reflect mine. It's a little bonkers, of course, but it's what, feeds me. But it's not unrelated to what we were talking about before about developing a relationship with technology. It's the same thing with our practice, like thinking really carefully so that because, it's not easy to be an artist in today's world. It's not easy. I'm not going to lie. It all sounds, social media makes everything look so fabulous and everyone's having a great time. But, it's hard work and there are a lot of challenges. And I think that we have to also develop really clear, clear ways to think about our time and to structure our time. And recently I did a talk. I've been teaching professional practice for artists for many, many years, and graduate and undergraduate and to artists. So I did a talk recently and I said, I really don't want to I don't want to use the same language that I've been using, this kind of corporate language about goals and things and all that. So I sort of developed, again, I'm interested in metaphor. I developed the metaphor of the garden. So our practice is like a garden. And this felt much more sort of soulful and to take into consideration my own, again, ethical framework and the ways I wanted to approach my practice, my engagement with other people, my engagement with my own practice. So, we plant things, we sort of decide which parts of the garden will be larger, whether it's residencies or exhibitions or programming. For some of us, some things will be a smaller part. And, because an artist practice is an ecosystem that contains a lot of different things. And so I thought, well, if I think about it as a garden, I might think, wow, I want to cultivate, more of this. And that means I'm not going to cultivate quite as much of that. And that felt like a much more soulful way to approach the very pragmatic things that we have to do as an artist. And also just felt, like I wanted to use different language than this kind of corporatizing, commodifying language that we are constantly pressured to do. Get on Instagram and sell this and do that. And, not interested in that. I'm interested in what can be a kind of fulsome, soulful practice and in a way that will feed me and, sometimes exhaust me. But, but if I'm thinking of, I'm planting this now and that seed will grow up later and I'm thinking about it seasonally, it helps me to be much more forgiving with the things that I can't do, etc. So I think for me, that's become a teaching metaphor also for each of us finding what is the sort of garden, the urgent garden ecosystem for us that will be meaningful, and that our gardens don't look the same, and all of that. So for me, and maybe again, it's because I grew up in a big family, there's always a lot going on that it makes sense. It feels more natural to me. But that's kind of the way that I think about it. I get inspiration, but it's also, I have to balance it, and it's that's not always easy, but it is part of what I choose, in my practice to do. So
Yeah, I will take it as an advice to our current students or students who
yeah.
are thinking about beginning their journey into arts. And I'm sure they get a lot of pressure for buying, selling, and get on Instagram. And your metaphor about the garden is really, really powerful, I think. And we all water our garden, water our ideas, and plant and nourish. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and I think it helps to not feel, like maybe doing the selling on Instagram is really right in your wheelhouse. That's your garden, man. You're into that, and maybe you're more, you want to work in community. I think it helps to think about that in the garden for me is a kind of again a soulful metaphor, as opposed to one that feels like we have to enter this, the world is a difficult place, especially now, and kind of coming out, thinking about how can I create a meaningful life for myself. So the garden, yeah, I think the garden is a good one. It's a good metaphor.
Where can our listeners view your work, either in person or online?
So probably the easiest thing right now is online. It's patriciamiranda.com is my website. The lacearchive.net is the Lace Archive website, which is a really big project. So that website is, websites are like living things. So it's not as updated as I would like, but it is a really big project that's happening behind the scenes. And if you have lace, I'm still, accepting lace. If you want to help me work with, document the lace. And the Crit Lab is thecritlab.com, and MAPSpace is mapspace.art. So that's where you can find out what I'm doing. And then on Instagram, I'm Patricia Suzanne Miranda, and Suzanne with a Z. So you'll see, because I'll be posting from all of those things. There are Instagrams for all of those, but you can find them through my Instagram, and about upcoming projects, and both at MapSpace, and then the Ultima Fae at the Crit Lab, and then the opening of the fall applications for Crit Lab. That will be happening soon. So you can check out the information on the website. Just find out about, what the different labs are. You can also see, every artist gets a page on the website, so you can see the range of artists, both in like where people are in their practice, but also the range of work, from like big installation, people working in museums, to people who are really, starting out in their practice or picking up a practice after many years. So it's a really wide range, and just an amazing group of humans. So I'm really incredibly privileged. And we have a private social network also that all of the Crit Lab people are part of too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Patricia. It was very inspiring. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. I had such a good time. Thank you so much. And yeah, hope to follow the gallery and your work as well, and find out much more about what's going on there. It looks amazing. Look, you're doing amazing work.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll do. We'll be connected now.
Okay. All right. Ciao a tutti.